Hi, welcome to tonight's webinar, Compassion, the Key to Emotional Health, and I might also mention, and Healing. This is an interesting topic to me, and I'm really happy to be able to share it with you. But I want to start by talking about when we get physically hurt. You know, we get cut, we break a bone, that sort of thing. That kind of injury is pretty visible. I mean, it leaves something that our eyes can see or our hands can feel, and we know it's there. But typically, if properly dealt with, that injury heals within a matter of time, and the body takes over, and it doesn't cause us any more pain or any more problems, and we can go about our life fairly regularly. Now, sometimes when an injury is really severe or it's not properly taken care of, there might be longer lasting effects to it, but typically physical injuries don't go on hurting us years later. But we also suffer emotional injuries. I mean, if any of you have ever had a spouse or a lover cheat on you, or you've ever been sexually or physically abused, or you've had other kinds of experiences where you felt belittled, ridiculed, put down, called a lot of names over a long period of time, or so forth, you probably know that some of those things, even though they're not visible, even though somebody else can't see that the injury is there with their eyes or feel it with their hands, that the injury to the person who is experiencing it feels very, very real. And what's interesting about a lot of emotional injuries is long after the physical part of the injury, if there was one, has healed, the people can experience pain and suffering, like from the death of a loved one, years and years and years later. They can still be suffering. It's like, where is the healing? Why is that kind of an injury? It seems like harder sometimes to overcome and harder to get over than the physical one. And that's something I've been exploring for many years. In the early 80s, as I was getting into natural healing, it was very obvious to me that there was a mental and emotional component to it. After all, health is composed of things like sleep and exercise and good diet and a lot of other lifestyle factors, and part of that has to be our mental and emotional state. And I believed it was important, but I didn't understand how important it was until I had a couple of personal experiences in which I had some profound healing for myself, and then I was able, with what I learned from that, to help some other people with some very profound healing. But the first time I worked with someone who had been both physically and sexually abused as a child, and afterwards she said, "What can I do for my 3-year-old daughter who has also been sexually abused?" I remember having this incredible awakening. I was starting to become aware of how many people have suffered this kind of emotional injury and how it's impacting their life and how they're suffering from it. And then maybe they repeat it, like children of alcoholic parents often marry an alcoholic, or children of abusers often marry abusers. And the problem goes on not just through a person's lifetime, but sometimes multi-generational. And I just really prayed very hard to be shown how I could help, because I just could sense people suffering, and I really, really wanted to be able to help people. And that was in the mid-'80s that happened. About 1986 is when that first started. So I've been working on this for a long time, and my understanding of emotional wounds and what happens has deepened. But the biggest thing I learned by my personal experiences of trying to help people with this is that empathy and compassion were the primary keys to me being able to help other people. Yes, I used a lot of tools, but the core tool of the whole thing is empathy and compassion. And I came to realize that empathy is the ability to sense, or in other words, to feel inside of yourself another person's emotional state. And that is even when they aren't outwardly expressing it. Now, obviously, we can oftentimes see a person's emotional state through their expression and hear it in their vocal tones and whatever. But I'm talking about being able to, when a person isn't showing what's going on inside them on their face, or talking about it, or whatever, to actually be able to sense things that are inside of a person that are going on. And compassion is very closely related, except compassion is the ability to literally share in that other person's emotional state. In fact, the very first experience that I had with trying to help someone with emotional healing, that's exactly what I experienced. I experienced feeling somebody else's emotional state as if it was my own, and it kind of blew me out of the water that that was possible. Now, I realized that was given to me probably as a gift because of my wanting to help people so much. But it's more than just relating to it. It's actually being able to sense clearly inside of you what's going on inside of someone else. And this is different than sympathy. I want to make a real important differentiation here. Sympathy is feeling sorry for someone. It's pitying someone. It's sort of a condescending attitude. And sympathy is not healing, because sympathy makes a person feel incompetent, whereas compassion is saying, we're in this together. In fact, the whole word compassion basically comes from the roots common and passion, or feeling. So when we have a shared feeling with another person, we're experiencing compassion, which also led me to, look at the thing of what are emotions anyway. Yeah, obviously, again, we can see, people's facial expressions as they're expressing emotion. But what was this thing called emotion? And when I, again, first started into this experience with emotional healing, the experience of empathy and compassion led me to conclude that emotions must be some kind of energy, because if I could feel the energy emanating from another person and tune into it and resonate with it, then it had to be some form of energy. And I also thought about, the fact that you could walk into a room after two people have been arguing, and even though they aren't arguing anymore, you have this thing that you feel like the air is thick. We say it's so thick you could cut it with a knife or something like that. In other words, we still sense a residual vibration or energy. And I concluded that it is that energy that is what emotion is. It's an energy of emotion. So what I came to understand is that emotion is really the energy of motion. In other words, it is the vibrating energy that causes us to move. That when I pondered this deeply, I looked, okay, we have this world of our head, our thinking processes, and we have our guts, which sort of represents our physical world, but in between is this world where we have our heart and our lungs, and the breath of life idea was associated with the lungs, or there was kind of this spiritual aspect of ourselves, and the heart with the emotional aspect of ourselves. And this world sits as the bridge between those two. And so what I concluded, and I want you to all understand, this is just, I'm taking you through my thought process, was that emotion was the bridge between thought and action. When we talk about the mind-body connection, emotion is the mind-body connection. Because if you look at someone may have an idea or an opinion in their head, like many years ago, when I was first getting into health and nutrition, I had dinner with a lady who was in our family who was a PhD in nutrition. And she was served this very healthy meal, and she says, I don't understand why my colleagues at the office who are studying the harmful effects of sugar and refined carbohydrates and caffeine and all this other stuff then go and have coffee and donuts at their break. She said, and that's when that was one of the things that helped me realize that thought does not equal action, that you can believe something, or not believe, but think something is true, like I should exercise or I should eat healthier or whatever, But if that thought does not link to an emotion that moves you to action, nothing takes place. So the feelings are the bridge between the mind and the body. In other words, the driving force behind everything we do in life is emotion. Without emotion, we don't do anything. In fact, really what happens when a person becomes depressed is their emotional self becomes severely suppressed, and as a result, they are very low in motivation and don't want to do much of anything. Whereas when you get enthused about something, which is a very positive, energetic emotion, you'll get really busy and you get really active and you go after something because that enthusiasm is a driving force. And so these things we call emotions are what are bridging our thoughts to our actions. But we also have not just the emotions, but we also have sensations or just feelings that are actually messages going the other way, messages going from our body and also from our heart up to our brain. And so when my intestines are bothering me, they might get this sensation of discomfort or this crampy sensation or a little bit of pain or something like that, which is not a word, it's not a thought, it's a sensation, a feeling in the body that is communicating something to the head saying you need to take a look at this. In other words, the way I think of it, and this is just my what I call functional definitions to help kind of me to keep these ideas straight, I think of as emotions as the bridge from mind to body and feelings as the bridge from body to mind. And but feelings are definitely a form of communication, okay? Now, emotions in our culture are dominantly viewed as one of two things. One is they're viewed as being entirely a physical phenomenon, meaning that they're the result of chemical messengers like hormones and neurotransmitters that are flooding through our systems, and that those imbalances are often genetic. So in other words, we're genetically predisposed to be anxious or depressed or whatever. So there's nothing really we can do about it because it's just chemistry in our body that's out of whack, and therefore we can give people drugs, or if we don't use drugs, herbs and nutritional supplements that will alter these chemicals and fix the feelings, okay? Now, there's another school of thought out there that really gets on the whole idea of positive thinking and positive mental attitude and everything, which I think is good. I think positive mental attitude is good. Just like I think nutrition is good. I mean, the body does need nutrients, and there are chemical imbalances that can take place in our body. And obviously, I think those chemical imbalances in our body can cause us to feel bad, because you try feeling good when you're really, really hungry and you haven't eaten in 12 hours, okay, or you have been deprived of sleep for several days. In other words, the body does affect how we feel, and the mind also does affect how we feel, because when we're thinking about things that are exciting and interesting or motivating to us, we'll probably have a good feeling associated with that. Whereas when we're thinking about something that we don't like, we'll probably have a negative feeling associated with it. But a lot of people think that that's all feelings are, as feelings are just a response to thoughts. But I'm saying that feelings are something more. That the feeling part of our nature is a third aspect of our being. That yes, thinking is important and taking care of the body is important, but the heart or the emotional part of ourselves is a third, separate and equal part of our nature that we need to learn to address and look at if we're going to truly be holistic in our approach to health. So I don't think emotions are simply a byproduct of either mental or physical processes. What I believe is, as a bridge, they can carry messages one way or the other, but the heart world can also initiate messages. That is, we can have our heart sending messages to our body, or our heart sending messages to our brain. And so it's a threefold communication, all interlocking, and each one of these aspects of our nature affects the other one. So I've often, because I was a Star Trek fan back when I was a teen, original Star Trek, I still am a Star Trek fan, but, you know, if you saw the original Star Trek series, you had, you know, Dr. Spock and Captain Kirk and Dr. McCoy. And Dr. McCoy is really the emotional person, and Kirk is the man of action, and Spock is the logical thinking part. So they kind of represent the three aspects of our nature, but Spock is supposedly without emotions. He's completely logical. And I always looked at that show. They had to make him half human, because it's really hard to conceive of a person that has no feelings whatsoever. In fact, once you understand that feelings are sensations that you experience in your body that are communicating messages to you, or that are moving thoughts into actions, then it would be impossible to have a being that was purely logical. You have to have emotion. Without emotion, nothing happens. And without emotion or feeling, you wouldn't have any way of knowing that something was going wrong inside of you, because your liver isn't going to say, hey, Stephen, I'm having a problem. You know, this is my problem, blah, 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 because our organs and our systems and our heart don't talk to us in words. They talk to us in sensation. And so without those sensations, we wouldn't have any way of knowing what was going on inside of ourselves. So Descartes was the one who said, cogito ergo sum, which is I think, therefore I am. And that philosophy has pretty much invaded Western culture, that thinking is supreme. That, in fact, you know, I've listened to many, you know, positive motivational speakers and so forth who talk like thinking is everything, that thinking overrules everything. However, I would say that if someone dropped a brick on your foot and smashed part of your foot, that wasn't your thoughts that would create the pain and the unpleasant feelings that were coming from your body trying to communicate back to your brain that something was wrong. In other words, thinking isn't everything. We have a body, and our body is also important. It's a vehicle for our brain, and just like, okay, you are the intelligence maybe that, you know, gets into your automobile and drives it, but the automobile gives you feedback that says, hey, you need to change the oil, or you're getting low on gas, or the battery is going out, or whatever. And you still have to pay attention to those signals, because the car has a certain, you know, feedback to give to you. So even if you view the body as a mechanism for the soul or the mind, the body still gives you feedback telling you what you need to do with it. So, you know, there's a little book out there by James Allen called As a Man Thinketh, So Is He. And, you know, that saying became very popular, and the actual origin of that comes from the Old Testament, but it's a misquote, because the actual quote is, as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. Not as he thinks in his brain. And I want you to think about this. When you say me, where do you point? If you're talking about yourself and you're referring to me, where do you point? Do you point to your head, or do you point to your heart? When you're saying you, do you point to someone's head, or do you point to their heart? It's instinctive to point to the heart as the center of you and me, because we somehow know that that's where the core of our self resides. It's not in our head. It's not in our thoughts. It's in our feeling. It's in our emotion. It's what's going on in our heart. And I would say that the reason why it's what we think in our heart that matters is because it's what's in our heart that translates into actions. And actions are what create our life for good or evil or positive or negative. And so since it's our emotions, what's in our heart, that's driving our life, then I would say that that becomes really, really critical to take a look at what is in our heart. We know in our subjective experience that we sense things and we relate them to our heart, especially when it matters of love. We talk about giving our heart. We talk about our heart breaking. We talk about taking heart as having courage. We also talk about taking things to heart as being overly sensitive or allowing things to affect us. We talk about having a heart when we are encouraging someone to be compassionate. We can harden our heart when we become cold and insensitive to others. We can lose heart when we become discouraged and depressed. And relationships are matters of the heart. So we instinctively understand that heart, if you look at this, is primarily how we relate socially, how we connect to other people and the world around us. In other words, the heart, not the mind, is the center of our social world, of our world in which we are connecting to other people and things around us. Now, I had these ideas, and I had very, very practical experiences with the ideas of emotion as energy and working with emotions as energy, and also empathy and compassion. And I had a lot of very, very weird experiences in doing emotional healing work, experiences that I couldn't explain until did I start the webinar early? Okay. I thought, no, I did have this planned for 5. Okay. So I read this book called from Secret Teachings of Plants by Stephen Herod Booner. And what he said is that modern analysis of the heart has shown that in spite of the fact that the most powerful ventricle of the heart can shoot water 6 feet into the air, the amount of pressure actually needed to force the blood through the entire length of the body's blood vessels would have to be able to lift a 100-pound weight 1 mile high. The heart is, in reality, not the pump of the circulatory system, but plays a much more subtle and elegant role, for the heart does not pump the blood. Okay. Well, guess what? I marked the time of the webinar. Hi, everybody. I apologize. I marked the time of this webinar on my personal office calendar as a half hour different from the time that I actually marked it to start and go to webinar. So I just realized that that I have, for most of the people who are logging on, I have started the webinar early. This is a little bit frustrating. I don't want to start the webinar over, though, so I think what I'll do is I'll go ahead and continue forward from here, and then I will, at the end of the webinar, after I stop the recording, I will go ahead and go back over some of the material for those who came on time, not late, but on time. All right. So anyway, back to this thing. What Stephen Herod Booner in his book, The Secret Teachings of Plants, says, and this is a book that I read like about one page at a time, because I had to think about it so much. I'd have to read a page or two and then put it down and have to think about it. But what I learned is that the modern research shows that the blood actually is moving on an electromagnetic wave. In other words, the blood is moving through the cardiovascular system electrically, not mechanically. and that the heart is about 60 to 65% neurons. That is not muscle cells, but actually nerve cells. And that basically what happens is the heart sets the tone of this electromagnetic wave, which is then carried out to every cell of the body via the cardiovascular system. So in other words, the heart is setting an electromagnetic frequency that basically is tuning every cell of the body to that particular electromagnetic frequency. When the heart has a direct connection to the brain that is unmediated, meaning the heart can go up and override your thoughts, but the messages going from your brain to your heart are mediated, which means that of the two, your heart has more influence on you than your brain. Now, all of us have experienced this when we've done something that we felt driven to do in our heart, but we logically didn't think was right. I mean, maybe you guys are all much better at that than I am, but I've had that experience. So the brain is directly wired to the amygdala. The heart goes into the brain, the part of the brain that is wired to the amygdala, thalamus, and hippocampus, which is the part of the brain that's responsible for emotional memories and processing, sensory experience, memory, spatial relationships, problem-solving, reasoning, and learning. So in other words, the heart has direct access to the part of our brain that has memory. It has direct access to the part of our brain that regulates sensory experience and so forth. So basically, the heart is another brain. The heart has a mind of its own, but the heart doesn't think in language. The heart thinks in vibration, in energy waves of vibration. And again, for those of you just joining me, I actually had the time of the webinar on my personal calendar at the office written down wrong, so I started the webinar early. Anyway, so our heart is broadcasting an electromagnetic wave throughout the entire body. And this is not only affecting every cell of the body, it is also causing that electromagnetic wave to radiate out from our body into the surrounding environment, like a broadcasting station. Now, when I read this, that said, I get it. I was right. My impression when I started to do emotional healing work, that emotions are an energy, was 100% true. And I have come to believe after reading this and doing a little more research that what we call emotions are an electromagnetic frequency generated by the heart that is radiating not only through our entire body, but also out into the surrounding environment. So when I said I was going to talk about in the thing what emotions are, this is what I came to understand emotions to be. They're the electromagnetic vibrations of the heart that set a resonance for the entire body. And the heart has the strongest electromagnetic field in the body. It's much stronger than the brain waves. So the brain waves are a weaker electromagnetic field. The heart is the strongest electromagnetic field. So the heart is going to influence your thinking more than your thinking influences your heart. Even though your thoughts can influence your heart is going to influence your thinking. And I'll give you a prime example of this. I just was working with someone just recently who had lost a loved one, and the person can't think about anything else. I mean, she's trying to put it out of her mind, but the pain and the suffering over that loss keeps coming up and overriding her thoughts. And if any of you have ever been in a situation like that where you've, again, had a really, really emotionally painful or traumatic experience, such as losing a child or losing a spouse or a parent or a beloved pet or something like that, you'll know that the grief can be so overwhelming that it feels like it takes complete control of you. So the heart definitely has this incredible impact through the feeling or emotion that goes through the body to basically influence everything. So when I talk about unresolved emotional wounds, I'm talking about something that has disturbed this electromagnetic field of the heart. And basically what it does is it causes the heart to have difficulty with certain frequencies. This is because and actually this happens because of the attempts of the brain to override the heart signal. Instead of the person being able to let the heart signal do what it needs to do, they learn with their brain to try to stop it and override it. And that creates an incoherence or a lack of harmony between the head and the heart. That is what I think an emotional wound is. It's a vibration where the head does not want to acknowledge what the heart is communicating. And that creates a disconnect in the person that disconnects their thoughts and their actions. In other words, all emotional wounds cause a disconnection between what I think and what I feel and what I do. And that sets up an internal disharmony that basically affects both our thoughts and our emotional health. So I believe, again, that to be truly holistic in healing, one must address all three of these aspects, and especially the emotional one, which is the one that we probably have the least information about, the least training on, and have the least experience with. So I want to address briefly the idea of motions as energy. And I put here a wave of water, and I put the Chinese yin-yang symbol on there because they're both showing the same thing. A wave has a rising and falling, an expanding and contracting. And that's really all that yin-yang symbol is showing, is that the expansion gives way to contraction, and contraction gives way to expansion, and they cycle around each other. That's what vibration is. It's just like the heartbeat. Expand, contract, your lungs. Inhale, exhale. This is all energy. And energy is therefore the whole issue of the thing. And this doesn't surprise me, since we live in an electrical universe. In fact, I'm a follower of the Thunderbolts project, which is about the electric universe, and very interesting material on this. But basically, the electric universe is about the fact that there's all these different kinds of energy that we're vibrating. In fact, if you get into this, you really find out that everything is composed of energy, because subatomic particles are nothing more than little, bits of energy, little bits of vibration. But the frequency of a vibration is how fast or slow it oscillates. And we live in a sea of these vibrations. If you think about it just for a moment, right where you are, wherever you are, if you have a cell phone, you can tune into a particular signal and receive a phone call from another person, and it's happening somewhere out there, and that phone call, that when you're broadcasting from your cell phone, it isn't just going straight to the tower, it's broadcasting in every direction as far as till that vibration wears out. It's just the tower that picks it up, okay? And the tower is broadcasting in every direction, but it's just your cell phone that's picking it up. There are TV stations, radio stations, cell phone messages, all kinds of radio communications completely surrounding you. You're immersed in them this very second. And all you need is the right receiver to tune into the right frequency, and you could pick up those vibrations and decode them as a TV show or a radio program, or a radio message from the police band or the citizens band, or a cell phone message. All of them. But they're all there simultaneously, all at the same time. Satellite signals coming down for GPS. Everything. You're surrounded in it. every second of every day. And the way that works is that you have a wave that is modulated to carry information. So you have a basic wave, a basic frequency that then is modulated or varied in order to encode the information, the auditory information, the visual information, all the information that basically gets transmitted in that signal that then your device, whatever you have, is decoding. Now, this is really important to understand because this is what's going to get into this whole idea of what empathy and compassion are and why this is so important. So here we are, like I said, you're surrounded by all these devices, hundreds of TV and radio stations, thousands of cell phone signals, all kinds of two-way radio communications, satellite signals, and all you have to have is the right device to tune into the right frequency, and then it can decode the message. So, and the funny thing is it's all vibration. I mean, when I'm speaking, my voice is going and hitting this little diaphragm in the microphone in front of me, and it's causing that microphone to oscillate back and forth, and that's causing an electrical signal to oscillate back and forth, which is going into my computer, which then is translating that signal into my Ethernet connection, which is then carrying it somewhere else, which is then broadcasting it. You're tuning into it in your home, and it's basically then vibrating another diaphragm and turning it back into sound waves. But it's all vibration. Every step of the way, it's vibration. That's all it is vibrations. And yet it's carrying information. So our bodies detect some of these vibrations that we obviously know about. We have eyes that detect the visible spectrum of light, and we decode images from that, But when we're seeing something, we're not seeing that thing. We're seeing reflected light. We're seeing frequencies, and we're decoding it in our brain as information that gives us a sense of an object out there. We also have sensory things for the infrared spectrum of radiation, which infrared is what used to be what operated remotes, just on an infrared signal, which is a signal that we feel as heat. You're able to send a signal to it and modulate on that. We hear the vibrations in the air as sound, okay? And then we have instruments to detect other forms of vibration. But the question is are there other forms of vibration that our bodies are capable of detecting? And, well, first of all, we know that our bodies are generating electromagnetic vibrations because we can detect them with instruments. We know that we have oscillations, as we talked about, from our heart waves, and we have brain waves. And there are other people who claim that we have other forms of energy vibrations emanating from us, chakras, meridians, or other subtle energy fields. We don't need to get into debate whether that's true or not. But we do know that scientifically we have brain waves and heart waves, which are electromagnetic. And according to Stephen Herod Booner, again in The Secret Teachings of Plants, cells in living organisms not only perceive, decode, and respond to extremely weak electrical signals, they perceive, decode, and respond to magnetic signals. In other words, to magnetic stuff. So this is from HeartMath, which is another source of this similar kind of information on the heart and how it interplays with the brain. They say that information sent from our heart to our brain can profoundly affect our thinking, and our emotional state is reflected in our heart rhythms, which affect the brain's ability to process information, make decisions, solve problems, and express itself creatively. In other words, what's going on in our heart is affecting our mind, and whether we're able to think clearly or solve problems clearly. And again, we all know this intuitively, because how many times have you been like too upset to think clearly, too emotionally upset? So in order to kind of simplify what I was learning, I created this emotional healing model several years ago, and I basically took and related emotions to colors. Since color is a form of vibration, I decided color was a good analogy, and I took like out of the 3 primary colors, you could mix the 3 secondary colors, and then you can mix all the different millions of subtle shades out of those different vibrations. So out of these basic vibratory states in emotion, you can mix all kinds of very, very complex emotional states and signals out of the basic 3. So just like white light contains all of the frequencies of the visible spectrum of light, I put white as being having access to all of these vibrations. In other words, us to be able to move freely through our life, experiencing all of the different energies of emotion, and experience them freely without inhibition. But what happens is, because we get wounded and we can't handle certain emotions and we try to suppress them, we lose part of our emotional color, if you will, and we become out of balance. So I put for the 3 primary emotions, fear as yellow, which made a lot of sense to me, grief as blue, and anger as red. And then out of that, I created the 3 secondary emotional states, which are basically created when you're absent one of the primary emotional states. In other words, if you suppress your anger so that you bury the red energy inside of you and you block it, you'll tend to be suppressed, which makes you discouraged, depressed, jealous, which is green. So that's how the model works, and I'm not going to go into it a lot today, but basically it's explaining emotions as vibrations. But one of the things I learned very early on is that the emotion itself is not good or bad. It's not the idea of talking about negative emotions in the sense implying that certain emotions are bad to feel, that you should not feel that emotion, is incorrect, because you're confusing the message and the messenger. When you feel pain, the message is unpleasant, but it's important, because when you feel pain, your body is telling you, hey, there's a problem here that you need to look at and address. And if you didn't have pain, you wouldn't address it. And if pain wasn't unpleasant, you wouldn't be driven to do something about it. You just let your body, continue to be damaged and irritated and hurt, and would never stop doing it until you just destroyed yourself. So the fact that pain is unpleasant, or what we, in that light, negative, means that it calls our attention to something needs to be done. Now, if I take and suppress the pain with a painkiller to try to numb the pain, it doesn't stop the body from trying to communicate that something's wrong. And it certainly doesn't fix what's wrong. And that's what is my major complaint about allopathic medicine, is it focuses mainly on trying to suppress the symptoms, which in my opinion are trying to say to you that you've got a problem and you need to look and figure it out and address it. But the same thing happens with the painful or quote-unquote negative emotions. They're not bad. It's not bad to feel them. They're telling you something's wrong. They're communicating that there's a problem and that you need to address it. You need to look at it. If you just try to deny it, well, I shouldn't feel angry, or I shouldn't feel depressed, or I shouldn't feel sad, or I shouldn't feel this, or whatever, you're basically ignoring the fact that there's a problem. And if you numb yourself with alcohol or drugs or whatever to try to make those feelings go away, or drugs, antidepressant drugs or anti-anxiety drugs or whatever you want to do, you still have a problem. You're just trying to kill the messenger instead of trying to hear the message. Now, in the beginning, I mentioned that I believe that emotions are the energy of motion. They are what carry thoughts into feelings. And in fact, when people talk about your life being created from your thoughts, that's not precisely true. Your life is created primarily from your beliefs, because your beliefs are the way you be and live. In other words, they relate to your beingness and how you choose to act. And a belief comes from a thought that is linked to an emotion. In other words, until a thought becomes linked to a very strong emotion that motivates action, there is no belief. A belief will always cause you to act because it is a way of being and living. In order to differentiate in my mind between thoughts and beliefs, I call thoughts that are not attached to emotions opinions. And people can have an opinion or an idea about something that doesn't affect their lives, they don't do anything with it. But you can have a dream or a wish or whatever, but until that becomes linked to emotions that are driving actions, it doesn't really affect your life. So what is happening here with your feelings is the pleasant or positive emotions are telling you that you're moving in a direction that your heart approves of, that your heart says is good for you, or your body is saying is good for you. The experience of taking good care of your body, of exercising, of eating healthy, of getting enough sleep and everything creates a good feeling in our body we call pleasure. When we're on track, when we're doing our life's work, when we're engaged with other people in a healthy way, we feel happy, we feel joy, we feel love, we feel a sense of peace. These are all messages that are saying you're on track, things are working, I've got enthusiasm for my life. When you're experiencing pain, that's usually your body telling you, hey, something's wrong, something's hurting me, something's causing me damage, you need to fix it. Well, the same thing's true when we're experiencing sadness or anger or jealousy or any of the so-called negative emotions. They're trying to communicate to us that something in the way we're living, something in the way we're being, something in our belief system is screwy. And I say this, that the problem, and this is what I learned in emotional healing work that's a little difficult to explain, and I can't fully explain it tonight. The problem is not what has happened to your life. The problem is your beliefs about what has happened in your life. And those negative emotions are saying there's something wrong with your beliefs, with your way of being and living, with the thoughts that you're attaching to certain emotions. There's something wrong with that, because the healing comes when you see the thing clearly and you get the right thought attached to the right emotion, and then you have this sense of peace. And that can happen even when you've been through some difficult, painful experiences or whatever. When you get the inner self, the thought and feeling, back into harmony, you can handle it. There's a peace about it. It's okay. It may be difficult, but it's okay. The sign that you're having this is trying to say, hey, there's something amiss here that needs to be corrected, and that's really what emotional healing is all about. And the reason this is the case is because just like we have physical needs, just like our body tells us, when we haven't had enough sleep or we haven't eaten healthy or whatever, and gives us feedback, we also have social, emotional needs. We all have a need to want to feel like we are accomplishing something good in the world. We have a need to love and be loved. We have needs that are non-materialistic. Okay? And emotions or feelings are linked to those needs. And therefore, when you're trying to deny a feeling or pretend it isn't there or make it go away or something like that, you're really saying, I don't believe in the needs those feelings are trying to communicate to me. And how can you fix your life if you're out of touch with what you need? If you've basically suppress the emotion that's telling you that you're needing something. If you took a drug that suppressed your hunger when you were hungry, you could starve yourself to death physically. If you try to take drugs to keep yourself awake forever, you're eventually going to have huge problems develop from that. Well, the same thing when you're trying to do something to make an emotion that's trying to communicate one of your needs to you that you need to do something about, and I stress that you need to do something about, not that somebody else needs to do something about, but that you need to do something about, then you're going to have this inner conflict because you're starving yourself in some way of the things that you need. And so as the author of a book by Carol Trueman, Feelings Buried Alive Never Die, that's the book that I got a hold of several years after I got into this, she basically says what I had started to realize, that feelings that are buried and not acknowledged never go away. The reason why we can have an emotional wound that causes us to suffer decades and decades later is because we've never fully acknowledged it and understood it. We've just tried to bury it and suppress it, and it never goes away. And that's one of the big keys I learned. Yeah, it's sort of like a stuck energy inside of the body, and that stuck energy can be triggered by various things, which cause us to behave in very not so socially acceptable or self-productive ways, which then can make us feel guilty about the feeling there and cause us to bury it even deeper or try to work harder to dam it up. And so the healing process of getting rid of this stuff, the way out is through. That's one of my sayings. In fact, I have an intern who studies some of this stuff, and she came in and reminded me of something I used to do at camp, which is she called it a bear hunt, and at the camp I went to, it was a lion hunt, where you say, I'm going on a lion hunt, or I'm going on a bear hunt, and then all the kids copy everything you do. So you gesture and make motions, and they copy. But in the story, you go on the hunt, and there's a swamp, and you go, can't go around it, got to go through it. So you go through the swamp, and then there's a tall grass, can't go around it, got to go through it. But everything is, you can't go around it, you got to go through it. And that's the way it is with emotions. You can't go around them. The harder you try to run away from them, the worse they chase you. So they become like the monster in the child's nightmare. They're chasing you and chasing you and chasing you, and they get bigger and bigger and scarier because you don't want to face them and deal with them. And that was the key that led me to be able to do emotional healing, was to realize that the way to get rid of a negative emotion was to confront it directly and experience it. Now, most people have a hard time doing that. In fact, we've been taught in our culture not to do that. But when, just like confronting the nightmare in the child's dream, when you confront it, it really it changes things. Things change, and that's when the energy that you were formerly blocking goes through you and dissipates, and it's gone. It's gone. And I've done this with hundreds and hundreds of people. So emotional healing isn't about taking a negative emotion and making it go away. It's about helping the person to turn around and face that negative emotion and acknowledge it's there and feel it and let that negative emotion teach you what that negative emotion is trying to teach you about your own beliefs and your own needs, so that you can then understand what you need to do to change your life in a constructive way that will stop having you experiencing that. Just like if you didn't get those messages that, what you just ate may upset your stomach, or the fact that you didn't get enough sleep last night, you're not functioning well, if those sensations didn't give you the feedback saying, hey, you're not taking good care of your body, you wouldn't know how to correct what you're doing to take good care of your body. Well, the same way is if you don't understand how to confront and listen to what your emotions and feelings are trying to tell you about the way you're taking care of your soul, if you will, okay, your beingness, then they're not going to go away because you're not taking care of the things that they're trying to communicate to you are amiss. It's done through self-awareness and self-responsibility, but also through increased compassion and better communication with others. So I'm going to get to this whole thing of compassion in a minute, which I think is the whole core of what I wanted to present tonight, because I think it's really, really an important thing that's needed in this world. But I want to just mention, I've had the most amazing experiences helping people do this. I mean, I remember one time this lady was talking about all this anxiety she has and how she fights her anxiety and blah, blah, blah. And I had her lying down and I said, just be anxious. Stop fighting it. Just let yourself feel the anxiety. And I coaxed her until she just accepted. She just felt the anxiety. She shook, she trembled, blah, blah, blah. And she says, wait a second, it just went away. And she looked at me and says, you knew that was going to happen, didn't you? And I said, yes, I did. Because I know that if I can help a person face that demon, I mean, this is what I learned. Feelings can be really, really uncomfortable, but feeling them never kill you. Will never kill you. It may feel like you're going to die, but really what dies is your false beliefs about life that are causing you to continue to behave in ways that are leading you to misery. Okay? That's what dies. That's what I think some philosophers call the ego self, you know? But I've seen when people do this, I've seen physical changes in their bodies. I've literally seen their shoulders straighten, their head held higher, their facial features change as the energy that they were holding on to was let go of. Their faces soften, their eyes soften, things happen. I've seen people who have been suffering for years from things, suddenly they're free of that burden of suffering. I've seen physical ailments. I remember one time I had a client who had very poor digestion, and I had her on some herbs and things to help her digestion, and they helped her a lot. But, you know, she was taking them, and then one day I got into the thing with emotional healing. We did an emotional healing session with her. She faced this helpless feeling she had inside from having several older brothers who picked on her constantly, and she couldn't fight back. And I helped her get in touch with the anger she had suppressed over that for years and years and years. And when she felt the anger and she acknowledged it and blah, 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 whatever, she stood up. She was taller. She wasn't so pale and frail looking anymore. And she quit having to need the herbs to help her digestive problem. I've lost so many clients that way. So if you want to just keep selling people herbal products, this may not be something you are interested in, because you wind up actually having them not need that stuff anymore. But I've also had people have incredible spiritual experiences. Once they confronted what was inside of themselves, I've seen them have the most amazing things happen to them in sensing a connection to God, sensing God's love for them, and other things like that, which are just very, very beautiful experiences. So this has been something that's meant a lot to me. So I want to explain briefly the core of what happens when, and this is something, like I said, I experienced, but I had no idea how to put into words until I read Stephen Herod Buder's book, and then I understood what it was I had been doing, and how doing it had helped me to heal as well as help other people to heal. So I want to start by explaining the idea of synchronization. And I saw them do this little experiment on Mythbusters where they put a whole bunch of metronomes on a surface that could move. But basically, if you just start off with two, and you start the two metronomes going at different times so that they are not in sync, over a period of a minute or two, they will gradually synchronize so that they're in sync. Now, they tried to do it with 500 metronomes, and it didn't quite work, but but with 20 or 30 even, they'll all go into sync. In other words, over time, they want to, the vibration of one affects the vibration of the other until they start to synchronize. Now, that's what's happening when you're broadcasting a signal, is the receiving station and the sending station are matched to the same vibratory frequency, so they synchronize. So the oscillation of the wave that's carrying the information oscillates with the receiving station and can decode it. That's called synchronization, and that's very important to understand. And according to the heart math people, when the heart and the brain are synchronized, that is, when their vibrations are acting as one, and there's internal coherence, in other words, synchronicity between the brain waves and the heart waves. They're not at odds with each other. They're oscillating together. We feel calm, and we also feel a sense of love. We have this flowing sense of care and love and calmness and happiness. This is our natural state. This is the state that all healthy children in a functional family exhibit as the routine state. They're enjoying life. They're not in turmoil. Their bodies aren't eaten up by tension. They're basically respond to love, okay? And we feel connected to the world around us when that synchronization happens within us, okay? Now, again, this heart that's beating, so it has a basic pulse, thump, 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 thump. But within that basic pulse, the heart is modulating that signal to send extremely complex information about ourselves and what's going on inside of us, not only to every cell of our body, but carrying that in a wave outside of us. And this is extremely complex information that's being encoded in the heart carrier wave. But as Stephen Herod Booner points out in this book, anything that broadcasts an electromagnetic signal also receives electromagnetic signals. That's why your radio, when there's no station that's tuning into, produces static, because the static is the signal your radio is broadcasting. And it's coming, that signal that your radio is broadcasting is coming back to the radio as feedback. So that's what static is. So if our heart can broadcast an electromagnetic signal, then our heart is also capable of receiving an electromagnetic signal. In other words, the heart can pick up and decode electromagnetic frequencies from other people, and not just from that, but from all other living things and even environments. That's why when you walk into the room after somebody's had an argument, and even though they aren't arguing anymore, your heart feels the tension, the discord, the incoherency that conflict basically carries. Because conflict is the opposite of synchronization. Conflict is things being out of sync or out of tune, if you will. And if you look at this from the point of music, you know, when you have a symphony and everybody's playing in tune and they're all playing together, there's a blending of sound that's very harmonious. But if something's out of tune, out of sync, then the ear hears it and goes, ooh, that's grating. Well, it's the same thing for the heart. When things are not coherent, the heart senses that and goes, oh, something's wrong. There's conflict here. This is not in sync. Okay? But the heart is also picking up and decoding extremely complex information and trying to communicate it back to the brain. So when we experience empathy, we're entraining our heart, or in other words, synchronizing our heart so that our heart is vibrating in harmony with or in tune with another person. And when we do that, we share emotional experiences because we're empathetically tuning into the messages their heart is sending, and we're therefore experiencing a common passion or a common feeling that creates a sense of connection between us and other people. It's just the same as a broadcast station sending a signal and the other one acting as a receiving station and decoding the signal. We are all capable of doing this. I've done it many, many times with people. However, what happens is, because we have pain, we have things that cause us to feel hurt or cause us to feel sad or grief or angry or whatever, we get the feeling that this is not a good thing. That it's not a good thing to have an open heart because we're going to get hurt, because we're going to feel pain. We don't want to have to feel the pain. We don't want to have to feel the sadness. We don't want to have to feel the anger. We don't want to have to feel those feelings. So we train ourselves to harden our heart. In other words, to make our heart so that it won't tune in or refuses to tune in to the frequencies of other people around us. And then we try to make our brain thoughts override the information from coming to our heart. But this does not protect us. It gives us the illusion of protection because we're sort of burying or numbing the pain, but we're also numbing ourselves to happiness. We're numbing ourselves to love. We're numbing ourselves to all of the good feelings of life too. In fact, I learned that my capacity to feel, that is to sense emotional vibration, was my capacity to sense emotional vibration in both directions. Meaning the more comfortable I became with allowing myself to feel my sadness or to feel my anger or to feel other emotions that are unpleasant, the greater became my capacity to feel all the pleasant emotions. The more I tried to close my heart down to not feel the unpleasant emotions, the more I closed my heart down to feel the pleasant emotions. Hence the title of this lesson, Compassion, the Key to Emotional Health. Emotional health is being able to feel and deal with the whole spectrum of my feelings. And the more I'm able to deal with the whole spectrum of my feelings, yes, I can feel the pain more intensely, but it doesn't last. Just like little children will get upset and then they quit crying and they go play again. Okay? But that also increases my capacity to feel the opposite, to feel happy, to feel joy, to feel love. Because when I numb myself to the one, I numb myself to the other, because hardening in my heart, I'm literally closing myself down to the signals that enable me to connect meaningfully with other people. So again, I'm really, if you want to think about your subjective experience of this, you've all experienced this, okay? You've had that moment when you were in love with someone or you just met this great friend or something, and you talk about it, we're in sync, we're on the same wavelength, we've got good vibes with each other, good vibrations. It's because your hearts are in training with that person, and therefore you're communicating heart to heart. You're feeling things in the communication, the words and body expression that go beyond the words and body expression. You're really decoding what that person is trying to say. That's the true meaning of listening with your heart. You really can listen to someone with your heart. Not just with your ears, not just with your eyes, but actually with your heart. You can hear or tune in to the vibration of what their heart is broadcasting. And you can feel compassion for them. I know I've done it hundreds and hundreds of times where I've sat and I've tuned into someone and they're having a hard time expressing what's going on inside of themselves because they're so afraid because they've tried to communicate about their feelings before and they've been met with negativity and rebuff and so on and so forth. And so I've tuned into their heart and I've suddenly felt what was going on inside of them. And I've actually let that feeling overwhelm me, and I've actually expressed the emotion that they were suppressing. And it immediately made them feel safe in letting it come to the surface. And we had a moment of compassion, and it was very healing for them. Just a couple of years ago, I was down giving a lecture on my book, The Heart's Key to Health, Happiness, and Success, down in Southern California. And it was an interesting experience because it was a group of people who'd never heard of me before. They just saw the thing about the lecture and came to the lecture, and only out of 25 people there, only 2 of them had ever seen me before. And as I was talking about this emotional stuff, one of the ladies just had a meltdown, and she started to cry. And I could feel everybody in the room get tense. And I just went over to her, and I basically looked at her and said, "It's okay, you can cry." And I tuned into her, and I felt the compassion for her, and I felt the pain she was in. And the minute I did that, everybody else in the room calmed down. I could feel them become less tense, and they started to tune into her. And before long, everybody was feeling compassion for this person. And when she got done crying, before she had been very pale, and she looked very stiff and very much in pain. She seemed so much more relaxed. The color was in her face. And I said, "Do you feel better?" She said, "Yeah, I feel a lot better." Well, she had just experienced connection with a room full of people. Her heart, which had felt alone and isolated and cut off and not understood, suddenly felt heard. This is so missing in our society, this ability to do this. In fact, it's becoming less and less a part of our nature, and people are becoming more and more judgmental, rude, so forth. One of my sons, and I've heard several other people say it, the internet fosters rudeness, where instead of people being compassionate and kind and understanding with one another, they're rude and critical and judgmental. And so we're perpetuating the emotional pain in the world that's causing people to not be able to feel those connections that enable us to really experience love and coherence and cohesiveness with each other. So, in fact, another thing that one of my new intern Rachel said is that the word kindness comes from the word kind, which actually means of the same kind. So when the more I perceive someone is like me, or in other words, the same kind as me, the easier it is to be kind to them, to exhibit kindness, which I think is interesting. So how do we create this communication, heart to heart? If I open my heart, okay, and I reach out from my heart with love and compassion towards another person, I can actually tune in and let my heart entrain to their heart. Now, the reason that most people can't do this is because they're afraid of their own emotions. How can I allow myself to tune into another person's grief if I haven't processed my own grief? If I'm carrying a lot of grief that I'm trying to stuff and deny and bury and pretend isn't there and make go away, and I'm not comfortable feeling it, then I certainly can't be comfortable letting myself feel somebody else's grief. So I have to harden my heart towards them in order to avoid feeling my own pain. The same thing's true of anger. If I can't deal with my own anger and the things that frustrate me and annoy me, then when someone else is angry, how can I tune in and be compassionate with their anger and try to understand it when I'm afraid of my own anger? Because then being compassionate with their anger would make me have to face my own anger, and I don't want to face my own anger. This is the whole issue that I found that happens, that why we have such trouble helping each other emotionally and being compassionate with each other. But when I open my heart and I tune into another person, the electromagnetic signals of our hearts entrain on each other and start to synchronize. And that creates a direct communication link that actually allows me to understand them far better than any words they could say or anything that they could, tell me or show me. And incredibly complex information comes through this link, including I have experienced directly accessing other person's life experiences. In other words, I've seen images about what they were going to tell me in their head about what they went through in their life, sometimes 3 or 4 or 5 minutes before they actually described those things to me. And what they described to me was exactly what I had seen 3 or 4 or 5 minutes earlier in my own mind as I was tuning into their heart. In other words, the heart signal can broadcast pictures and images and as well as feelings that can be decoded by the brain. Maybe this is, so again, that's being in the groove, being in the same wavelength. That's what compassion is. Compassion is getting on the same wavelength. Okay? And we need this. We need this in this world. We need each other. We need to have friends and close relationships. It's scientifically proven that people who have good, loving relationships with people where they can, have people who care about them and they can express their feelings and everything, live longer, have healthier lives, are less susceptible to heart disease, recover better from illness. This affects our health, everyone. This is not just someone. It was funny. I read some comments people posted on Facebook. Somebody said, when they said this is just a stupid feel-good thing. No, this isn't a stupid feel-good thing, because I wanted to say to them, having compassion is not about feeling good all the time, because when you tune into someone who's hurting, you feel they're hurt. But the amazing thing is a burden shared becomes lighter. When you share someone's burden, you both are lifted. I don't know how that happens, but to me, doing this has never left me feeling emotionally drained or whatever. It's always left me feeling emotionally elated, like amazed. It's a beautiful, beautiful experience. But people get afraid of it, so they harden their hearts out of fear, and then hardening their hearts out of fear, they're afraid to connect with other people because they're afraid of their own pain, so they're afraid of other people's pain, and then they feel alone and isolated and disconnected. But when you connect with other people in this way, yeah, there's some pain, but it's shared pain. You're in this together. We're all human beings. We all have this stuff, and we're not alone. And that really makes a big difference when you realize that. You can actually diagnose things with this, which, again, Stephen Herod Booner talks about this in his book, as what a lot of traditional healers would do. When you open up your heart to someone who is emotionally wounded or sick and you allow your heart to entrain on theirs, you can actually feel in your own body what's wrong in their body. Now, what's the miracle of this is, since hearts like to entrain on each other, if you can feel that and yet maintain your own centeredness, as you feel and sense it, and then you come back to your own place of inner strength and peace, their heart wants to stay entrained with you. And so their heart wants to move with you back to the place of centeredness and peace inside of you. And that actually guides them non-verbally towards healing. And that's again, a lot of what happens when I do emotional healing is totally invisible. Nobody watching this thing would know what was going on, because it's all going on inside of the feelings. So one thing I really want to leave you with is the heart. This is one of my favorite things that I've been saying for years. The heart knows things the head will never understand. So don't let your head override your heart, but don't let your emotions override your heart either, because make keeping your heart peaceful, loving, and happy a top priority. The Heart guidance. This is another thing I've learned from all my experiences of almost 3 decades now of working with my own emotions and working with other people's emotions. When we talk about letting your heart guide you, we're not talking about letting your anger drive you, your fears drive you, your sadness drive you. Those are all emotions that you want to tune into and figure out what's going on inside of yourself and what's happening and what you need. When you figure it out, when you come to the right answer, when you see through your false beliefs or you see through the thing that you've been denying that's one of your needs or whatever, a feeling of peace will come over you, which tells you you found the right answer, you found the right path. The brain can learn to hijack your emotions, and so it can basically try to make your heart angry or whatever in order to try to get your way. But true guidance is coming through your heart is always accompanied by feelings of peace, love, and that coherence, that inner sense of integrity or inner well-being, which comes from being in sync with yourself. Wholeness. To be healthy is to be whole. And the word holy comes from the same roots. Health, whole, and holiness all have to do with this being in tune, with this being in sync, with this being in integrity, with this being in line with that place of love and peace inside. I've learned that when I feel confused, or when I am confused, because confused is actually a mental thing, not a feeling, and I'm feeling angry or upset or afraid, that I'm not in coherence, and therefore any decision I make out of a state of fear or upset or anger is going to be a bad one. So I've learned to pray and say, God, show me the path that will bring me peace. And when I find the path that brings me peace, then I make my choice. Because that I know then is the place where I'm acting from inner coherence, and I also believe coherence with the divine, and I am acting in a way that will bring goodness to both to myself and others. I believe that the heart, when the heart coherence is the moral compass. You know, the brain can rationalize, meaning justify, doing all kinds of mean and ornery things. Think of the people who in war or whatever, or because they were told to do it or whatever, have justified themselves in committing huge atrocities against their fellow man. Your brain, when you disconnect it from your heart, is capable of all kinds of horrific things. But if you have compassion, how can you harm another person? Because the moment you do something that starts to cause them emotional pain, if you have compassion, you feel that you're causing them emotional pain. You feel that you're causing them emotional pain as if you were causing it to yourself. And since we're all connected, maybe you are. And therefore, you stop. So if we could learn to have compassion with one another again, to stop hardening our hearts and living in such, anger and judgment, fear, and start opening our hearts and really learning to be empathetic and compassionate with each other, we would find it a lot easier to be moral with each other, because we wouldn't want to do anything that was causing pain or whatever, or something to another person. That's why, again, I believe that being able to have this quality of open-heartedness that allows us to be compassionate with other people is the key not only to emotional health in ourselves, but it's the key to us truly being able to help people around us. Because again, from my brain, I often think, oh, I know what's wrong with you and I can fix you. But that seldom works. That usually leads to arguments, contention, and blah, blah, blah. But when I truly am able to tune in and sense another person and show that I have understanding and empathy and compassion for them, then it opens up a whole new realm, because now I really understand what's going on with them. I really feel for them, and I can guide them back to wholeness in a much more sincere and meaningful way. So here we are in Western civilization, almost all of us disconnected from our body. We have a hard time listening to the feedback from our body. We want someone to tell us how to eat. We want someone to tell us how to live, when our body's trying to tell us that every day. I pay less attention to what books tell me about my health and more attention to what my body tells me about health. And the same thing with our emotions, our heart, okay, which tells us about these things about how people around us are feeling and how we're making other people around us feel. Okay, when we're out of touch with our body and our heart, we can't make good decisions because we don't even recognize what our needs are. We don't even understand what's happening. And if we deny our own needs and we deny our own feelings and we deny our own things, how can we possibly care about anybody else's needs and feelings? So this is the words of a song that I really like. It's one of a number of songs that I use when I'm trying to explain emotional healing to people. And I'll spare you by trying to sing it to you. And I'll just read you the words. You know where you live, but you've never been home. Everyone in your house has been living alone. Something is wrong, and you know it's not fair, but it's easier to hide than to show that you care. Will you come home? Will you come home? Will you come home to your heart? You've kept away from yourself from the start. You can come home now, home to your heart. You work hard all day. How you strain to stand tall, trying to make someone love you. Better yet, make them all. But the doors have been closed, all your secrets concealed, and you're living your life so they're never revealed. Will you come home? Will you come home? Will you come home to your heart? You've kept away from yourself from the start. You can come home now, home to your heart. Again, when you point to me, typically very, very few people will point to their head. Most all of us will point to our heart. That's a home. That's the center of our beingness. Point to you, your heart, center of your beingness. If we can't understand our own hearts and we can't open our hearts to the hearts of other people, we really don't understand, where our home is. The world needs healing. The world needs healers. I am so committed to wanting to try to share this message, to teach people about this, to do this because it pains me, like even when I'm on Facebook, seeing all of the negative, judgmental, angry things that are going on in the world as people are disconnected from each other and critical and uncompassionate and unempathetic with each other. And I really want to help make a difference and change that. 28 years ago, when I worked with that young lady who had been sexually abused and physically abused, and she told me her daughter had been physically abused 3 times in the next 24 hours, I broke down and I wept and I pled and I pled. I said, God, if there's anything I can do to help change this, to help stop this, let me know. And I've spent decades working on this. And I really want to share this with as many people as I can. That's why this year, this is just, a thing. I launched a certified emotional healing coach program. The first class in Introduction to Emotional Healing starts next week. The program consists of that plus my emotional anatomy course, my balancing neurotransmitters and hormones course, which is about the physical side of that, fluorescences and aromatherapy, which is tools I've used to help me with that, and something about personality typing and therapy. And then this also includes my free running a successful consulting business class. If you're interested in helping me with this and would like to study and learn about some of the things that I've learned in my nearly 3 decades of doing this, please feel free to attend any or all of these courses. You can get them all together for $650. If you're part of our member program, which is $19.95 a month, and you sign up before February 9th, it's $350. After that, it's going to be $500 for members. But the certification will require that you come to an intensive. The first intensive will be held in November, and it'll be $750. That does include travel, meals, and lodging. That's 5 days because we're going to actually work on, you've got to experience doing this on yourself in order to be able to do it with other people. But I'd encourage you, if you're really interested, to try this. There is a 30-day money-back guarantee from the start of the class. So if you buy the first class, for an introduction to emotional healing, and after you've listened to the first 2 or 3 lessons, you go, this isn't for me, we give you your money back. I don't want to take anybody's money if we don't give them what they want. And also, if you can't afford it, but you really, really want to do this, and you make less than $36,000 a year, you can apply for a scholarship or financial assistance. That on our website, we have an intake form for that. You can say, I really want this, I can't afford it, here's the circumstances, this is what I want to do with it, and we can either give you a substantial discount, or we are going to do 1 or 2 people perhaps that we give a full scholarship to. So don't let the lack of funds keep you from working with this. So this comes to the question and answer period, and I'm going to go ahead and say thank you, and I'm going to stop the recording, which I'm going to post on the website, and you're free to, when I send you the link, in fact I did send out a link where the handouts were posted, and the recording will be posted the same way, and after the recording's posted, I'll send you out the link to the recording. Feel free to share this with anybody you want. Send them to the link. If you think this was valuable, then link to it and tell people about it. Okay.